Hey, welcome in. Get comfortable, let the day fade out, and we'll ease into a quiet story from the Middle Ages. You do not become a knight overnight. You are shaped into one. Slowly, deliberately, and often harshly, long before you ever hold a sword with authority. So let's begin not with armor or battle or glory, but with birth. Because in the medieval world, who your parents were mattered more than anything you would ever accomplish. If you were born into a noble family, your path was already being carved before you could walk. Your father likely served a lord. Perhaps he held land in exchange for military service. Perhaps he was a knight himself, scarred, weathered, and quietly proud of the violence that built his status. From the moment you entered the world, expectations settled over you like a weight you could not yet feel. You were not simply a child. You were an investment, a future soldier, a continuation of a name, a tool in a system where loyalty and warfare defined survival. Your earliest memories would not be soft or sheltered. Even in noble households, childhood was not a prolonged sanctuary, it was preparation. Your home might have been a stone castle or a fortified manor. Cold walls, narrow windows, smoke drifting through rooms from central hearths. The smell of animals never far away. Even in privilege, comfort was limited. There were no quiet nurseries filled with toys. There were wooden floors, simple bedding, and constant reminders that life was fragile. You would have seen weapons long before you understood them. Swords hanging from walls, shields marked with your family symbol, helmets resting like silent observers in corners. These were not decorations, they were necessities. Your father, or whichever male figure oversaw your upbringing, would not speak to you about these things in soft, instructive tones. He would expect you to observe, to absorb, to understand without needing it explained. Because in his world, weakness was not corrected gently, it was eliminated. Your mother's role was different, but no less important. She managed the household, oversaw servants, and ensured alliances were maintained through hospitality and presence. She may have shown you affection, but even that was tempered by reality. Infant mortality was high. Children died often. Families learned, out of necessity, not to attach too deeply too quickly. So love existed, but it was quieter, more restrained, less spoken. As you grew, your environment became your first teacher. You watched how adults spoke to one another. You noticed how your father stood when addressing his lord, upright, controlled, deferential, but never submissive. You learned that power had a language, and it was not always loud. You noticed how servants lowered their gaze, how they moved quickly, efficiently, never drawing attention unless necessary. You began to understand your place without anyone needing to spell it out. Above some, below others, always within a structure that could not be challenged. Religion reinforced this structure. The church was not separate from daily life. It was woven into it. You were told that your place in the world was ordained, that hierarchy was not just social but divine. God had placed kings above lords, lords above knights, knights above peasants. And you, if you were lucky, were somewhere near the top of that chain. This belief mattered, because it made obedience feel righteous, even when it demanded violence. Your early childhood was not filled with formal lessons the way we think of them today. You were not sitting in classrooms or memorizing texts for exams. Instead, you learned by imitation. You held wooden swords long before real ones. You chased other children through courtyards, pretending to fight battles you barely understood. You listened to stories, some told by elders, others by traveling minstrels, about great knights, heroic deeds, impossible courage. These stories shaped your imagination. They told you what you were supposed to become, but they did not tell you the cost. No one spoke in detail about the broken bones, the infections, the fear before battle, the screams that lingered long after the fighting stopped. Those lessons came later. For now, your world was still forming. You learned to ride almost as soon as you could balance, not because it was fun, but because it was essential. A knight without a horse was incomplete. At first you rode small ponies, guided by stable hands who had far more patience than your father. You learned how to mount, how to grip with your legs, how to stay steady even when the animal beneath you shifted unpredictably. You fell often, and each time you were expected to get back up without complaint. Pain was not something to dwell on. It was something to ignore. That lesson alone would follow you for the rest of your life. Your physical development was watched closely. Strength mattered, endurance mattered. You were encouraged, sometimes forced, to be active, to push your limits, to grow into a body that could handle the demands placed upon it. There were no structured workouts, no carefully designed training plans. There was labor, climbing walls, carrying objects, running across uneven ground, handling tools that were heavier than they looked. Everything was preparation, even when it didn't seem like it. Social development was just as important. You were expected to learn manners, not out of politeness, but out of necessity. One wrong word, one poorly timed comment, could damage relationships that your family depended on. You learned when to speak, when to stay silent, when to show confidence, when to show humility. These were not optional skills, they were survival tools. As you approached the age of 7, something significant happened. You left home. This was not framed as abandonment, it was presented as opportunity. You were sent to serve in another noble household, often that of a lord your family was connected to. This was where your real training would begin. But before that moment, there was a quiet shift. Your identity began to separate from your family. You are no longer just a child under your parents' protection. You were being prepared to represent them, to carry their name into another household, to prove your worth in an environment where no one owed you kindness. The journey itself could take days, sometimes longer. Roads were rough, travel was slow. You may have ridden part of the way, walked other parts, accompanied by retainers or guards. As your home disappeared behind you, something settled in. Uncertainty. You didn't know what your new life would look like. You didn't know how you would be treated. You didn't know if you would succeed. But you did know one thing. Failure was not an option. Because in this world, there were no second chances waiting for you. Only consequences. And so, before you ever lifted a real weapon, before you ever stood in armor, before anyone called you a knight, you were already being shaped. Not just into a fighter, but into a product of a system that valued loyalty over individuality, duty over comfort, and survival over everything else. The idea of knighthood, the polished image of honor, courage, and noble purpose, was something you would grow into believing. But the foundation beneath it was far less romantic. It was discipline. It was pressure. It was the quiet understanding that your life was not entirely your own. And that realization, more than anything else, marked the true beginning of your journey. Because from here on, every step forward would move you further away from childhood and closer to the reality of what it truly meant to be a knight. The moment you arrive at your new household, something becomes clear almost immediately. You are no longer special. Back home, you were your family's son. There was familiarity, a sense, however small, that you belonged. Here, you are one of many. A boy in a line of boys, all sent for the same reason. All expected to prove themselves. This is your life as a page. And it begins quietly, but not gently. You wake early, earlier than you're used to, not because someone kindly nudges you awake, but because the household is already moving. Servants are working, fires are being lit, horses are being fed. The castle does not wait for children to adjust. You learn quickly that your role is not to be entertained. It is to serve. Your tasks seem small at first. Carrying messages, pouring water, helping dress members of the household. standing silently during meals, ready to assist when needed. You are expected to observe everything: how a lord speaks, how a lady carries herself, how knights interact with one another. This is education, but not the kind that comes with explanation. No one sits you down and says, "Here is how you behave." Instead, mistakes become your teacher, and mistakes are corrected quickly. Sometimes with sharp words, sometimes with something less verbal. You begin to understand that your position is fragile. You are not a servant, but you are not equal to those you serve. You exist somewhere in between, close enough to power to witness it, far enough from it to feel its weight. Meals are no longer relaxed moments. You do not sit at the main table. You eat after others have finished, or off to the side. The food may be better than what peasants eat, but that doesn't make it generous. You eat what is given. You speak when spoken to, and you learn quickly that silence is safer than attention. Your clothing reflects your role, simpler than noble attire, but still maintained enough to represent your family well. You are expected to look presentable, even if you are tired, even if you are uncomfortable. Because your appearance is not just about you, it reflects your lineage, and failure reflects back home. One of the most important parts of your life as a page is proximity. You are near knights, not as one of them, but close enough to watch. You see how they prepare, how they speak, how they carry themselves when others are watching, and how that changes when they think no one is paying attention. You begin to notice something subtle: the difference between reputation and reality. The stories you heard as a child painted knights as flawless, brave, honorable, unshakable. But here, in the quiet corners of a real household, you see something else. You see exhaustion. You see frustration. You see men who carry responsibility like armor they cannot remove. This does not make them weak, but it makes them human. And that realization stays with you. Your training begins slowly, almost invisibly. You are taught how to ride more properly now, not just to stay on a horse, but to control it, to guide it with subtle movements, to remain steady even when it resists you. You practice with wooden weapons, not for strength, but for form. How to hold, how to step, how to balance. At first, it feels like play, but over time, you realize that every movement is being watched, corrected, refined. Because habits formed now will follow you into real combat later, and bad habits can get you killed. You also begin learning discipline in ways that have nothing to do with fighting. You are taught patience. You wait often. Wait for instructions. Wait for meals. Wait for opportunities to prove yourself. You are taught humility. Even if you come from a respected family, that status does not protect you here. You earn your place daily. You are taught awareness. You begin to notice small details. Who is in favor with the Lord? Who is falling out of it? Which alliances are forming? Which tensions are growing? You are not directly involved in politics, but you are surrounded by it, and understanding it becomes part of your survival. Religion continues to shape your days. You attend prayers. You are reminded constantly of duty, of obedience, of divine order. You are told that your path is not just social, but spiritual. That to serve well is to honor something greater than yourself. Whether you believe this fully or not, it becomes part of how you think, because everyone around you believes it, or at least acts like they do. Emotionally, this period is more difficult than anyone admits. You are young, far from home. Surrounded by expectations you are still trying to understand. There are moments, quiet ones, when you miss familiarity, when you wonder if you belong here, but you do not voice those thoughts. Because vulnerability is not something this world rewards. Instead, you adapt. You harden. You learn to carry discomfort without showing it. Friendships form, but they are different from childhood friendships. There is competition beneath them. Every boy here knows that not all of you will rise. Some will fail. Some will be sent away. Some will never move beyond this stage. So even camaraderie has limits. Trust is measured, carefully given, and sometimes withdrawn just as quickly. As the years pass, you change. Your body grows stronger. Your movements become more controlled. Your understanding deepens. But the most significant change is internal. You begin to see yourself differently, not as a child waiting to grow up, but as someone in transition, someone being shaped into a role that carries weight far beyond your current abilities. You start to feel that weight, even before you fully understand it. By the time you approach your early teens, expectations shift again. Less tolerance for mistakes, more responsibility, more scrutiny. You are no longer just learning. You are being evaluated, watched more closely, judged more critically, because the next stage is approaching, and not everyone will be chosen to advance. You may not hear those words spoken aloud, but you feel them. In the way you are corrected, in the way you are compared, in the way opportunities are given to some and not to others. And so you push harder. You become more focused, more careful, more deliberate in everything you do. Because this is no longer preparation in the abstract. This is selection. And the life ahead, the one you've been told about since childhood, depends on whether you prove yourself worthy of continuing forward. Your time as a page does not end with celebration. There is no moment where someone gathers the household and announces your success. Instead, it transitions quietly. One day, expectations change. Your responsibilities shift. And you realize, you are no longer just watching knights. You are about to serve one directly. And that is where everything becomes more real. Because the next stage is no longer observation. It is preparation for war. The transition from page to squire does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives with expectation. One day, the tasks you once carried out at a distance begin to move closer, more personal, more demanding. You are no longer simply observing knights. You are assigned to one. And from that moment forward, your life becomes directly tied to his. This is where the path toward knighthood becomes real, and far less forgiving. As a squire, you are no longer treated as a child in training. You are treated as someone preparing for responsibility, which means the margin for error disappears. Your knight becomes your teacher, your commander, and, whether he intends it or not, your model for what you may eventually become. You wake when he wakes. You move when he moves. You prepare what he needs before he asks for it. His armor becomes your responsibility. And that alone is a task that demands precision. Armor is not simply worn, it is maintained piece by piece. Chainmail must be checked for broken links. Leather straps must be reinforced. Metal must be cleaned, dried, and protected from rust. A single overlooked flaw could mean failure in battle. And failure in battle is not theoretical. It is immediate. So you learn to inspect everything carefully, to notice what others might miss, to treat preparation as seriously as combat itself. Because you begin to understand something fundamental. Victory often depends on what happens before the fight begins. Your training intensifies. Wooden weapons are replaced with real ones, though still used under supervision. You begin learning the weight of a sword not as an idea, but as a reality. It is heavier than you expected. Not impossible to wield, but demanding. Every swing requires control. Every movement requires balance. You are taught that strength alone is not enough. Precision matters. Timing matters. Endurance matters more than both. Because a fight does not end when you are tired. It ends when someone can no longer continue. And you do not want that someone to be you. You train with the lance. At first it feels unnatural. Holding it steady while riding is not intuitive. Your arm aches. Your grip slips. Your aim falters. But repetition changes that. Slowly, painfully. You begin to align your body with the movement of the horse, to feel the rhythm rather than fight it. And when it finally clicks, you understand why cavalry is feared. Because momentum, combined with control, becomes something devastating. You also learn to fight on foot. Because not every battle is mounted. And when you are unhorsed, you are vulnerable. So you practice movement in armor. At first it feels suffocating, heavy, restrictive. Your breathing changes. Your range of motion tightens. But over time, your body adapts. You learn how to move within it, how to conserve energy, how to remain effective even when weighed down. And perhaps most importantly, how to stay calm inside it. Because panic in armor is dangerous. It wastes energy. It clouds judgment. And it can turn a manageable situation into a fatal one. Beyond weapons, you learn logistics. Something rarely spoken about, but essential. You learn how to pack supplies, how to prepare a horse for travel, how to manage equipment over long distances. Because war is not just fighting, it is movement. It is endurance. It is maintaining readiness even when nothing is happening. You accompany your knight more frequently now. On patrol, on visits to other lords, on journeys that expose you to the wider world beyond the safety of a single estate. And the world, you realize, is not stable. Tensions exist everywhere. Borders are uncertain. Alliances shift. Violence is never far away. You begin to see conflict not as an event, but as a constant possibility. Your first experience near real combat is not dramatic. It does not resemble the stories you heard as a child. There is no heroic speech, no moment where everything slows down. Instead, it is tense, uncertain, messy. You watch from a position slightly removed, but close enough to understand what is happening. The sounds are different than you expected. Louder, more chaotic, less controlled. There is shouting, metal striking metal, the impact of bodies colliding, and something else, something harder to describe. The realization that this is not a game, that people do not simply fall and rise again. They fall and stay down. That moment stays with you, long after the encounter ends, because it replaces imagination with reality. And once that happens, you cannot return to the way you saw things before. In addition to combat training, you are expected to support your knight in tournaments. These events are structured, but not safe. You help prepare his armor. You check his equipment. You assist him before and after each event. And you watch closely. Because tournaments are not just displays of skill. They are opportunities to gain reputation, to earn wealth, to establish presence among peers. You begin to understand that being a knight is not only about fighting. It is also about perception, how others see you, how you carry yourself, how consistently you perform. Because reputation can open doors or close them permanently. Your relationship with your knight becomes more complex over time. At first, he is distant, focused on his own responsibilities. But as you prove yourself reliable, that distance can shift, not into friendship, but into something closer to trust. He may begin to correct you more directly, to explain decisions, to test your understanding. These moments matter because they are not given freely. They are earned, and they signal something important, that you are no longer just present. You are being considered. Physically, the toll increases. Training is harder, longer, more demanding. You experience injuries, bruises that linger, muscles that do not fully recover before being pushed again, fatigue that becomes familiar. But unlike earlier years, there is less sympathy, because by now you are expected to endure, to continue, to adapt. Emotionally, you change as well. The uncertainty you felt as a page begins to narrow into focus. You know what is expected now. You understand the path. But that clarity comes with pressure, because expectations are no longer abstract. They are immediate. You are being evaluated constantly, by your knight, by others in the household, by peers who are on the same path. Every action contributes to how you are perceived, and perception determines opportunity. Some squires begin to fall behind. Not always because they lack ability, sometimes because they lack discipline, or consistency, or the ability to adapt under pressure. And when that happens, the difference becomes visible. Opportunities shift, trust shifts, paths begin to diverge. You become more aware of your own position, where you stand, how you are progressing, and whether you are moving forward or stalling. Time moves differently during these years, faster in some ways, slower in others. Days are long, but the transition toward knighthood approaches steadily, and you begin to feel it, not as excitement, but as weight. Because becoming a knight is not simply an achievement. It is a commitment, one that carries consequences you are only beginning to understand. By the time you near the end of your years as a squire, there is a shift in how you are treated. Subtle, but noticeable. You are given more responsibility, more independence, more expectation. Your knight may rely on you more openly. Trust your judgment in small matters. Observe how you handle them, because what is being measured now is not just your skill, but your readiness, your ability to carry the role you have been preparing for since childhood, and whether you can do so without hesitation, without collapse under pressure, without forgetting what is required of you. Because soon, very soon, the question will no longer be whether you are learning. It will be whether you are ready to be named. And once that moment arrives, there is no returning to this stage, only forward, into a role that demands everything you have been trained to give. The moment you have been moving toward for years does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with certainty. Instead, it approaches gradually until one day you realize it is no longer distant. You are being considered for knighthood, not promised, not guaranteed, considered. And that distinction matters, because this final step is not simply about skill, it is about trust, about whether those above you believe you can carry the responsibility of the title without compromising what it represents. The preparation begins before the ceremony itself, and much of it is not physical. You are expected to reflect, to understand what it means to become a knight, Not in the stories you heard as a child, but in the reality you have now witnessed. You have seen combat. You have seen consequences. You understand that this role demands more than strength. It demands restraint, judgment, control, and the ability to act when hesitation would be fatal. In the days leading up to the ceremony, your routine shifts. There is a sense of seriousness that was not present before. Your knight, who has guided you through these years, may speak to you more directly now. Not as someone still learning, but as someone about to step into the same role. He may test you in conversation. Ask what you believe your duties are, what loyalty means, what honor requires. There are no perfect answers, but there are revealing ones. Because what matters is not whether you repeat an ideal. It is whether you understand its weight. The night before the ceremony is often marked by vigil. You are brought into a chapel, or a quiet space set aside for prayer. Your weapons may be placed nearby, not as tools, but as symbols. You remain there for hours, sometimes alone, sometimes observed from a distance. This is meant to be a time of reflection, of preparation not just of the body, but of the mind. You kneel. You sit. You stand. Time moves slowly, and in that stillness, you are left with your thoughts. There is no distraction here. No training exercise to focus on. No task to complete. Only the understanding that once this moment passes, your life will not return to what it was. You may think about your childhood, about your family, about the years spent training, about the moments you succeeded, and the ones where you nearly failed. All of it leads here, and whether you feel ready or not, that question is no longer entirely yours to answer. The ceremony itself varies depending on time and place, but certain elements remain consistent. You are dressed carefully. Your clothing is cleaner than usual, prepared to reflect the significance of the moment. You are brought before those who will witness it, your lord, other knights, members of the household. This is not a private transition. It is public, because your new status must be recognized and remembered. You kneel. That act alone carries meaning. It is not submission in the way a servant kneels. It is acknowledgement of authority, of structure, of the system you are now formally entering. The oath follows. Words that speak of loyalty, of protection, of service. You may not remember every phrase clearly in that moment, but you understand what they represent, because you have been living under their expectation for years. Then comes the defining act. Your lord, or the knight performing the ceremony, touches you with a sword, on the shoulder, sometimes both. A gesture that is simple but final. You are named, and with that, everything changes, not outwardly at first. The world does not pause. The castle does not shift. The routines of daily life continue, but your place within it is different. You are no longer preparing to become a knight. You are one, and that distinction carries immediate consequences. Expectations increase, not gradually, but instantly. You are now responsible for your own actions, your own decisions, your own conduct. Mistakes that were once corrected are now judged. You are expected to uphold these standards associated with your title, not just in battle, but in behavior, in speech, in how you represent yourself and those connected to you. The concept of chivalry is often spoken of at this stage as a guiding principle, a code. You are told to be honorable, to protect the weak, to remain loyal, to act with integrity. These ideals are presented clearly, confidently, as if they are easily followed. But you already know that reality is more complicated, because you have seen knights who do not always live by these standards. You have seen decisions driven by necessity rather than principle. You have seen moments where survival overrides idealism. And now, those contradictions become yours to navigate. Because the title does not come with clarity. It comes with responsibility. And responsibility often involves choices that are not simple. After the ceremony, there may be celebration, food, recognition, acknowledgement from others. But even in those moments, something feels different. Because the transition is not just external, it is internal. You feel the shift in how others look at you, in how you carry yourself, in how aware you are of your actions. Because now, you are no longer being shaped into the role. You are expected to embody it, and there is no one ahead of you to absorb the consequences. That responsibility now rests with you, fully, completely, and permanently. From this point forward, every decision you make, every action you take, every moment you hesitate or choose not to, defines not just your future, but the meaning of the title you now carry. And that realization is far heavier than any armor you will ever wear. The ceremony is over. The title is yours. But the life that follows is not what most imagine. Because being a knight is not a constant stream of battles, glory, or heroic moments. Most of your life is spent in something far less dramatic. Routine, responsibility, and the quiet pressure of maintaining your position. You wake early, not because you are told to, but because your responsibilities demand it. There is land to oversee, people to manage, obligations to fulfill. If you hold land, even a small portion, you are responsible for it. That means overseeing peasants who work it, ensuring crops are planted, monitoring yields, addressing disputes, collecting rents or dues. You are not just a warrior. You are part administrator, part enforcer, part representative of a larger system that depends on order, and maintaining that order is not always clean. Disputes arise frequently, between families, between workers, between those who believe they have been treated unfairly. You are expected to resolve these issues quickly, decisively, sometimes fairly, sometimes efficiently, because stability matters more than perfection, and hesitation can lead to larger problems. Your loyalty remains tied to your lord. That does not change after knighthood. If anything, it becomes more binding. When you are called upon, you respond, whether that means traveling, fighting, or supporting his interests in ways that are not always visible. This obligation is not optional. It is the foundation of your position. Your daily routine includes training, not as preparation anymore, but as maintenance. Your body must remain capable, strong enough to fight, enduring enough to survive. You practice regularly. Sword work, mounted drills, movement in armor, because skill fades if it is not used. And in your world, you do not get the luxury of losing your edge. Your diet reflects your status, but not always in the way you might expect. You have access to better food than peasants, meat more frequently, bread of higher quality, occasionally wine instead of ale. But food is still inconsistent, dependent on season, on supply, on what your land produces, or what can be acquired. There are days of abundance, and days where even you feel the limits of what is available. Hygiene remains limited, despite your status. You may have access to baths more often than common people, but they are not frequent. Water must be carried, heated, prepared. Clothing is worn repeatedly. Sweat accumulates. Dust settles into fabric. And over time, you grow used to it. Comfort is not a priority. Function is. Your household grows. You may have servants, perhaps even your own squire, someone now in the position you once held. And with that comes a shift in perspective. You begin to understand what your knight once carried, the responsibility of being observed, of being imitated, of knowing that your actions shape someone else's development. And that realization changes how you behave, because now, you are not just responsible for yourself, but for what you pass on. Your reputation becomes one of your most valuable assets. It determines how others treat you, whether opportunities come your way, whether alliances are offered or withheld. Reputation is built slowly, through consistency, through reliability, through how you act when no one is watching, and when everyone is. But it can be damaged quickly, through poor decisions, through failure, through actions that suggest you cannot be trusted. So you learn to manage it, not through deception, but through awareness, understanding how your actions are perceived, and adjusting when necessary. Social expectations remain constant. You are expected to attend gatherings, to interact with other members of the nobility, to maintain relationships that extend beyond your immediate duties. These interactions are not casual. They are strategic. Every conversation has weight. Every impression matters. Because alliances are not always formed on battlefields. They are formed in halls, over meals, through shared interests and mutual benefit. You learn to navigate these spaces carefully, to speak with intention, to listen more than you talk, to recognize when to assert yourself, and when to step back. Because misjudging these moments can have consequences just as serious as any fight. Your relationship with violence changes. As a squire, it was something you were approaching, something you were preparing for. Now, it is part of your reality, not constant, but always present. You understand what it takes to fight, what it costs, and what it leaves behind. That understanding removes any illusion that once existed. There is no mystery left in it, only necessity, and sometimes obligation. There are periods of calm. Days where nothing urgent demands your attention, where routines feel almost predictable. These moments are not wasted. They are used to maintain readiness, to reinforce relationships, to ensure that when something does happen, you are prepared. Because unpredictability defines your world. Conflict can emerge without warning. Orders can arrive suddenly. And when they do, you do not have time to prepare. You must already be ready. Emotionally, this stage is different from anything before it. There is less uncertainty about your path, but more awareness of its consequences. You carry responsibility daily, not in theory, but in practice. Your decisions affect others, their safety, their livelihood, sometimes their survival. And that weight does not disappear when the day ends. It stays with you, in quiet moments, in reflection, in the understanding that your role is not temporary, it is ongoing. You may find moments of satisfaction, when things go well, when decisions lead to stability, when your efforts produce results. But those moments are balanced by the awareness that they are not permanent, because nothing in your world is. And so your life settles into a rhythm, not of comfort, but of function, of maintaining what you have, of preparing for what may come, of carrying a title that demands consistency above all else. Because being a knight is not defined by a single moment, not by the ceremony, not by one battle. It is defined by what you do every day after, and whether you can continue to meet the expectations placed on you, without faltering, without forgetting what your role requires. Because in this life, there is no finish line, only continuation, and the constant demand to prove that you belong where you stand. If there is one image that defines a knight in the modern imagination, it is this: a figure encased in steel, sword in hand, standing unshaken in the face of danger. But what that image does not show you is what it actually feels like to live inside it. Because armor is not just protection, it is weight, heat, restriction, and constant maintenance. Long before you step onto a battlefield, you learn that your equipment is not separate from you. It becomes an extension of your survival. Your armor evolves over time. Early in your life, it is chainmail. Thousands of interlinked metal rings. Flexible. Reliable against cuts, but not perfect. It does not stop blunt force. It does not prevent impact. A strong strike can still break bones beneath it. So padding is worn underneath. Layers of fabric. Quilted protection meant to absorb what the metal cannot. Even this combination is not light. It presses against your body, restricts your breathing slightly, forces your movements to adapt. Over time, plate armor begins to appear. Shaped metal designed to deflect blows. More protective, more durable, and more demanding. Each piece must fit correctly. Chest, shoulders, arms, legs, helmet. Every part must align. Because if it does not, it becomes a weakness instead of a defense. Putting it on is not quick. You do not simply dress yourself and step outside. You require assistance. Straps must be secured. Pieces must be fastened in the correct order. If something is missed, you may not notice until it is too late. And once you are fully armored, your world changes. Your vision narrows. Your hearing dulls. Your breathing becomes louder inside your helmet. You feel your own presence more than the world around you. Movement becomes deliberate. Every step considered. Every turn controlled. Because sudden movement wastes energy. And energy is limited. Fighting in armor is not about speed in the way people imagine. It is about efficiency. Knowing when to move, when to hold position, when to commit. Because every action carries a cost, and exhaustion arrives faster than you expect. Your weapons are chosen not for style, but for purpose. The sword is the most recognizable, balanced, versatile, capable of cutting, thrusting, and adapting to different situations. But it is not always your primary weapon. The lance, when mounted, is far more powerful. It turns your movement into force, a controlled impact that can break through defenses. But it is limited. Once used, it is often discarded, and the fight continues. You carry a dagger as well, not as a secondary option, but as a necessity for close encounters, for moments where distance disappears, for situations where precision matters more than strength. Other weapons exist: maces, axes, polearms, each designed to address a specific problem. Because armor changes the nature of combat. Blades alone are not always enough. You must adapt. Choose the right tool for the moment, and understand its limitations. Training with these weapons never truly ends. Even as a knight, you continue to practice, to refine, to maintain familiarity, because skill is not permanent. It fades without use. And in a world where your life depends on it, that is not a risk you can afford. Combat itself is not clean, not structured, not predictable. It is chaotic. Movements overlap. Decisions happen quickly. Mistakes are immediate. And consequences follow without delay. You learn to read opponents, not through thought alone, but through instinct built from repetition. How they stand, how they move, where they hesitate. Because hesitation is often the opening you need, and the one you must avoid showing. The physical toll is constant, even outside of battle. Your body carries strain from training, from equipment, from repetition. Joints wear down, muscles tighten, fatigue lingers. But there is no extended recovery, no structured rest period. You continue. Because stopping is not always an option. Injury is part of this life. Minor at times, serious at others. Cuts, bruises, fractures, each one managed with limited resources. Healing is uncertain. Infection is always a risk. And what begins as manageable can become something far more dangerous. You learn to assess your condition constantly, to understand what you can push through and what may compromise you, because misjudging that line can end your ability to fight entirely. And for a knight, that is more than injury. It is loss of purpose. Despite everything, you adapt. Your body adjusts to the demands. Your movements become more efficient. Your awareness sharpens. You begin to operate within the limitations rather than against them. And that is where effectiveness comes from. Not from overpowering the constraints, but from understanding them. Because armor and weapons do not make you invincible. They make you capable. And capability still depends on how well you use it. Because in the end, steel does not decide the outcome. The person inside it does. War does not begin with a charge. It begins with waiting. Long stretches of uncertainty where nothing happens, and yet everything feels close to breaking. As a knight, you do not decide when war comes. You respond to it. A message arrives. A summons from your lord. And whatever your life looked like the day before, it changes immediately. You gather what you need. Armor, weapons, supplies. You prepare your horse. You organize what you can carry. Because once you leave, there is no guarantee of when or if you return. The journey to war is not dramatic. It is slow, measured. Columns of men moving across uneven land, dust rising with every step. Conversations are quieter than you might expect, because anticipation replaces excitement. Everyone understands what lies ahead, even if no one says it out loud. When you arrive near a battlefield, there is no immediate clash. Instead, there is positioning. Forces assemble. Leaders assess terrain. Decisions are made that will shape what happens next. Where to stand. When to move. How to engage. You wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes longer. And during that time, your mind does not stay still. It runs ahead, through possibilities, through outcomes you cannot control. You feel the weight of your armor more clearly now, not because it has changed, but because you are aware of what it will soon be tested against. When battle begins, it does not unfold cleanly. There is no single moment where everything aligns. Instead, it breaks into motion. Commands are shouted. Horses shift. Lines begin to move. And suddenly, you are part of something larger than your own actions. If you are mounted, your role is defined by momentum. You move with others, not independently. A cavalry charge is not a solitary act. It is coordinated force. The ground trembles beneath you. Your focus narrows, not on the entire battlefield, but on what is directly ahead. Distance closes quickly, faster than your mind can fully process. And then, impact. The collision is not smooth. It is abrupt, violent. You feel it through your body, through your arms, through the structure of your armor. And in that moment, everything becomes immediate. There is no time to reflect, no time to plan beyond the next action. You respond, instinct guiding movement more than thought. Because hesitation, even for a second, creates openings. And openings are dangerous. The battlefield is not orderly. Formations break. Positions shift. Visibility changes constantly. You may lose sight of those you began with. You may find yourself surrounded by unfamiliar faces, all equally focused on survival. If you are unhorsed, the experience changes completely. The height advantage disappears. Mobility is reduced. The ground becomes uneven, crowded, more difficult to navigate. You must adjust quickly, because remaining in one place is not safe. You learn to move with awareness, to avoid becoming trapped, to recognize when to engage, and when to create distance. Because survival is not always about advancing. Sometimes it is about positioning. The sounds of battle remain overwhelming. Metal striking metal. Voices raised in commands or reaction. The movement of bodies around you. And beneath it all, a constant tension. A sense that everything could shift at any moment. There is no clear beginning or end to individual engagements. Fights overlap, merge, separate. You are rarely facing a single opponent in isolation. Awareness must extend beyond what is directly in front of you, because danger does not announce itself. It appears. And if you are not prepared for it, it finds you. Time behaves differently here. Moments feel extended. And yet the overall experience passes quickly, because your focus is compressed, reduced to immediate decisions, immediate reactions, immediate consequences. Eventually, the momentum shifts. One side begins to lose cohesion. Movement becomes less coordinated, more fragmented. And once that happens, the outcome follows. Victory is not always clear at first, but you feel it. In the way resistance changes, in the way movement begins to slow, in the way the structure of the opposing force starts to collapse. And when it does, the intensity begins to fade, not instantly, but gradually, leaving behind something quieter and heavier. The aftermath of battle is not celebrated immediately. It is processed. You take stock of what remains. Who is still standing? Who is not? Equipment is recovered. Wounds are assessed. And only then does the reality of what has happened begin to settle in. Victory, when it comes, is not always accompanied by relief, because it comes with cost. Visible and not. You carry that forward. Into the next day, into the next engagement, because war is not a single event. It is a series of moments, each one building on the last, and each one leaving something behind. As a knight, this becomes part of your life, not constantly, but often enough that it shapes how you think, how you prepare, how you understand the role you now carry. Because war is not where knighthood begins, but it is where it is tested, and whether you are ready for it or not. That test comes without warning, again and again, as long as you remain in this world. Not every battle is fought in war. Some are fought in front of crowds, in open fields prepared not for survival, but for display. This is the world of tournaments. And while they may appear safer than war, they are not without risk. For a knight, tournaments serve multiple purposes. They are training, they are competition, and they are opportunity. Opportunity to be seen, to be remembered, to elevate your standing beyond the quiet boundaries of your land. You arrive among others who share the same goal. Knights from different regions, different allegiances, all gathered in one place. The atmosphere is different from war. There is structure here, order, an expectation that events will follow a sequence. But beneath that, there is still tension, because reputation is at stake. And reputation in your world carries real consequences. The most recognized event is the joust. Two riders, opposing each other, separated by a barrier, each holding a lance. The objective is simple: maintain control, strike with precision, remain mounted. But simplicity does not mean ease. The speed alone demands focus. Your horse moves forward with force. The distance closes rapidly. You must align your aim, stabilize your body, and commit at exactly the right moment. Too early, and your strike loses power. Too late, and you miss entirely. The impact, when it lands, is significant. You feel it through your arm, through your shoulder, through the structure of your body. And even when executed correctly, it is not without danger. Lances can splinter. Fragments can strike unexpectedly. Balance can shift. And a fall at speed carries consequences similar to any battlefield mistake. Beyond jousting, there are melee events, less controlled, more dynamic, multiple participants, engaging simultaneously. These resemble battle more closely. Movement, positioning, awareness of multiple threats, but still within a framework that attempts to limit fatal outcomes. Attempts, because limits are not guarantees. Injury is common, sometimes severe, and occasionally final. Yet knights continue to participate, because the rewards extend beyond the event itself. Victory brings recognition, prestige, and sometimes material gain. Equipment taken from opponents, ransom for captured participants. Opportunities that would not exist otherwise. But even without victory, performance matters. How you carry yourself, how you compete, how consistently you demonstrate capability. All of it contributes to how you are perceived. And perception, over time, shapes your position within the broader network of nobility. There is also a social dimension that cannot be ignored. Tournaments are gatherings, not just of fighters, but of observers. lords, ladies, individuals whose opinions influence opportunity. You are watched, not only for skill, but for conduct. How you handle success, how you respond to failure, how you interact with others. Because a knight is not defined solely by combat ability, but by presence. And presence extends beyond the field. Courtly expectations emerge here as well. The idea of refined behavior, of measured speech, of presenting yourself as more than a soldier. These expectations are not separate from knighthood. They are part of it. You learn to navigate attention, to maintain composure when observed, to avoid drawing the wrong kind of notice. Because admiration can elevate, but missteps can spread just as quickly. Stories form around these events, accounts of skill, of near victories, of moments that stand out. Some become exaggerated over time, shaped by those who retell them, refined into versions that emphasize certain qualities: courage, precision, control. These stories contribute to something larger, the image of knighthood itself, an image that often appears more polished than reality. Because what is remembered is not always what was experienced. You begin to understand the difference between living the role and being seen within it. They are connected, but not identical, and managing both becomes part of your responsibility. Because reputation is not built solely on truth. It is built on perception of truth. And that distinction shapes how others engage with you, how they trust you, how they position themselves around you. Over time, tournaments become less about proving that you can fight, and more about demonstrating that you belong among those who do. Consistency replaces novelty. Reliability replaces surprise. You are no longer trying to stand out once. You are trying to remain visible over time. And that requires discipline. Because attention fades if it is not maintained. But excess draws scrutiny. So you learn balance. How to perform without overreaching. How to engage without exposing unnecessary risk. Because even in this controlled environment, the consequences of miscalculation remain real. Eventually, you leave the tournament grounds, return to your land, to your responsibilities, to the quieter rhythm of daily life. But what happens there does not stay there. It follows you, in how others speak of you, in how you are received, in the opportunities that begin to open or close. Because tournaments are not separate from your life as a knight. They are an extension of it. Another arena where your role is tested, not through survival alone, but through performance, and whether you can sustain it, without losing control of what it represents. By the time you have lived as a knight for years, you begin to understand something that is not often spoken aloud. Your role is built on contradiction. You are trained for violence, but expected to act with restraint. You are part of a system that enforces hierarchy, but told to protect those beneath it. You are bound by loyalty, but sometimes placed in situations where loyalty conflicts with judgment. And at the center of all of this is religion. The church is not separate from your life. It shapes it, defines it, explains it. From childhood, you were taught that your place in the world is not random. It is ordered, structured by divine will. Kings rule because they are meant to. Lords command because they are appointed. And knights serve as instruments within that structure. This belief matters because it provides justification for hierarchy, for obedience, and for the actions that follow from both. You attend services regularly. You hear teachings about duty, about sin, about judgment. You are reminded that your actions are not only seen by those around you, but by something beyond them, and that awareness influences how you think, how you decide, how you interpret what you are asked to do. The idea of chivalry is often connected to this, presented as a moral framework, a guide for how a knight should behave: loyal, honorable, protective, measured. These principles are clear in theory, but in practice, they are not always easy to follow, because your world does not always provide clear choices. There are moments where protecting one person may harm another, where loyalty to your lord may conflict with what you believe is right, where decisions must be made quickly, without the time to fully consider their consequences. And in those moments, the simplicity of ideals gives way to complexity. You begin to understand that being a knight is not about always knowing the right answer, but about acting despite uncertainty and carrying the outcome that follows. Confession becomes part of this process, a way to reconcile action with belief, to acknowledge what has been done, and to seek a form of resolution, whether that resolution is internal or granted by the institution you are part of. Because even in a world where violence is expected, it is not always comfortable, and that discomfort does not disappear. It is managed, interpreted, integrated into how you continue forward. Religious conflict extends beyond personal reflection. It shapes larger events as well. Wars fought not only for land or power, but for belief. Campaigns framed as duty, as necessity, as obligation to something greater than any individual. You may find yourself participating in these efforts, not because you chose them independently, but because they are part of the system you serve. And within that system, refusal is not always an option. This creates tension between personal understanding and collective expectation, between what you feel and what you are required to do. You learn to navigate this tension over time, not by eliminating it, but by carrying it, by accepting that clarity is not always available, and that action is still required, even without it. Your sense of honor evolves. It becomes less about how others define it, and more about how you apply it, in decisions, in restraint, in moments where no one is observing. Because those are the moments that define consistency, not the ones where recognition is present, but the ones where only you are aware of what you choose to do. Over time, you may notice differences among other knights, how they interpret the same expectations, how they respond to similar situations. Because while the framework is shared, the application is not identical. Each individual navigates it differently, based on experience, on perspective, on what they have seen, and what they have learned from it. This variation does not weaken the system, but it does reveal something important: that knighthood is not defined solely by external rules, but by how those rules are lived. And lived experience is rarely simple. There are moments where your actions align clearly with your beliefs, where decisions feel justified, where outcomes match intention. And those moments reinforce your understanding of your role. But there are also moments where they do not, where outcomes are unclear, where consequences extend beyond what you expected. And in those moments, you are left to reconcile what happened with what you believed would happen. That process shapes you, not quickly, but over time, through repetition, through experience, through the accumulation of decisions that cannot be undone. And as that process continues, you become more aware, not just of your role, but of its limits, of what it can achieve and what it cannot. Because while knighthood carries authority, it does not resolve every conflict. It does not remove uncertainty. It does not guarantee that every action will lead to the outcome you intend. What it does provide is a framework, a structure within which you operate. And within that structure, you make choices, repeatedly, consistently, knowing that each one contributes to the person you become and to the meaning of the role you carry. Because in the end, knighthood is not defined only by what you are expected to do, but by how you choose to do it, and whether you can continue to carry those choices without losing sight of what they require. There is no clear moment when a knight begins to decline. No single day where strength suddenly leaves. No announcement that your role is changing. Instead, it happens gradually. So gradually that at first you do not notice it at all. Your movements feel the same. Your routines remain unchanged. Your responsibilities continue as they always have. But over time, small differences begin to appear. Fatigue lingers longer than it once did. Recovery takes more time. Movements that were once effortless now require attention. Not because you have become incapable, but because your body has endured years of demand. And it remembers, in ways that cannot be ignored forever. The injuries you carried earlier in life begin to return, not as sudden pain, but as persistent reminders. A stiffness in your joints, a limitation in your movement, a quiet awareness that your body is no longer as forgiving as it once was. You adapt, because that is what you have always done. You adjust your training, your pacing, your expectations of what you can sustain. But adaptation does not stop time. It only allows you to move with it. Your role begins to shift, not away from responsibility, but toward a different form of it. You are relied upon less for physical execution and more for judgment, for experience, for perspective that others have not yet gained. You may take on a more direct role in leadership, guiding those who now stand where you once stood, squires, younger knights, individuals still learning what you have already lived. And in those moments, you see the path from a different angle. You recognize the same uncertainty, the same effort, the same attempts to prove capability, and you understand what they cannot yet fully see. What lies ahead? Because you have already walked it. Your influence becomes quieter, but not less significant. It moves from action to guidance, from demonstration to interpretation. And that transition carries its own weight. Because stepping back is not always easy. Even when it is necessary, there may still be moments where you are called to fight, where your presence is required in the same way it once was. And in those moments, you rely less on physical dominance and more on efficiency, on awareness, on knowing what matters and what does not. Because experience allows you to see beyond immediate action, to recognize patterns, to anticipate outcomes, and that becomes your advantage. But even that has limits, because time does not pause for experience. It continues, and eventually, there are fewer moments where you are expected to stand at the front, more moments where you are expected to remain behind it, not as absence, but as support. Your life becomes less defined by movement and more by continuity, maintaining what exists, ensuring stability, passing on knowledge that would otherwise be lost. Because what you have learned is not written, it is carried through experience, through repetition, through decisions made in moments that cannot be recreated. And if it is not passed on, it disappears. You begin to think differently about legacy, not in terms of recognition, but in terms of what remains after you are gone. Your name may be remembered, or it may not. That is not entirely within your control, but your influence. The way you shaped others, the decisions you made that affected lives beyond your own, that continues, even when you are no longer present to see it. Death, when it comes, is not always dramatic. It does not always arrive in battle. For many, it comes quietly, after years of service, after a life defined by obligation, and when it does, there is rarely ceremony beyond what tradition requires. Burial, acknowledgement, a continuation of life for those who remain. Because the world does not stop. It continues forward, as it always has. And in that continuation, your role becomes part of something larger, not as an individual moment, but as a contribution to a system that extends beyond any one person. Knighthood itself changes over time. The world around it shifts. Structures evolve. Expectations adapt. But the core experience, the path you walked, remains part of its foundation, because every knight who came before adds to what the role becomes, and every knight who follows builds on what was left behind. In the end, your life as a knight is not defined by a single achievement, not by one battle, not by one moment of recognition. It is defined by duration, by consistency, by the ability to carry responsibility over time, without abandoning it. And when that time comes to an end, what remains is not the armor, not the weapons, not even the title itself, but the impact of how it was carried, and whether, through all of it, you fulfilled what was required of you. Not perfectly, but completely. If you enjoyed this journey, consider liking the video and subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's here and how far this reaches. Now, rest easy. Because your bed is warmer, your night is quieter, and your world is far more forgiving than the one you just left behind.